in Masechet Bava Kamma is Daf Nun Bet, and we only got up to, we're actually a little behind. We're on the two dots, around 10 to 15 lines from the bottom of Nun Aleph Amud Bet. So we only got to those two dots yesterday. That'll be pretty quick. So the Mishnah said, we talked about a Mishnah yesterday where you have two owners of a bar. And yesterday's daf, we questioned how you could have two owners of a bar if a bar has to be in Hefker, has to be in Reshut Rabim. So how can you have any owners? And so we said generally the person who digs a bar is the owner. And there has to be a case where two people dug it simultaneously, right? There was a big rock at the bottom and they both moved it at the same time. So the Mishnah said that if the first one came by and left it uncovered, and then the second guy came by and left it uncovered, and then the animal fell to it and died, it's the second one's responsibility, right? That was the Mishnah. So it says the Gemara today, Avar halav harishon v'lo kiso, and then the Sheni, the second one is chayav. Ask the Gemara harishon, me'matai miftar. Now, when is the first one able to say, I left it in the reshut of somebody else, meaning that someone else came and checked it, I'm not the last person there, right? When do they become pator? Rabba Rav Yosef Damar Travau Shmei Rabba Rabba Chana Damar Shmei Rebbe money. Chad Amar Misha Minicho Mitashmish. Second is you leave from using it, and remember you have two people waiting online, right? Two owners. One uses it first, he then walks away, and the other one uses it. Once he walks away, the other one is chayav for all watching, and the first one is patur. One says Misha Yimser Lo Dalyo. You have to give him the deli. Now, we're going to see it's very complicated in our sugya, not so complicated according to Rashi, what a dalyo is. So deli in our terminology always means a bucket, right? But that's not what it means according to Rashi in this Gemara. It means according to Rashi, the top of the bar. They used to have some kind of mechanism. I don't know if it was a locking mechanism or a cover, right? Where you basically, maybe like a key almost that fit into the top of the bar. No one else necessarily have it. And once you pass that on, that's responsibility. It's like, these are the keys, basically. This is what you have responsibility for. So once you give that over, then you are patur. But if you just say to the other person, oh, you can use it now, that doesn't assume that you're no longer watching it from anyone falling into it. Okay, so you have to specifically essentially give over shmira or give over ownership. Kitznai. In fact, there's a Braita that says exactly these two opinions. The Braita says hamadle mayim min habar. Person is drawing water from a well. Ubach haveirov amarlo. And his friend comes to him and says, look, I need to use it. Hanachli, leave it to me, and I'm going to draw now. So then he gives it to his friend, he walks away, and 5 minutes later, an animal walks into the bar. Who's responsible? So says the Braita, patur. Once you've given it over for the other person to use it, you're patur. It's his responsibility. And Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says, no, lo dalyo. You have to actually give him the keys or give him the cover to say, okay, you're responsible now for the bar. When you're finished using it, you leave it covered. And once you've done that passing over, then it becomes responsibility of the other person. The Maika Miflagi, what's that machloket based on? It says the Gemara, a very fascinating explanation. This is really very interesting. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Savar Yesh Brera. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov holds in general, and we're going to see in a second why we say this, because he does hold this, that there's a concept of Brera. Remember, Brera is this great and ubiquitous Gemara concept of when you have two or multiple people, or Brera shows up, I think more than they say more than anything. It's the most commonly cited concept or something, but it's definitely very common. Where you have two people or more who are involved in an object, how do you view their ownership or their usage? So yesh Brera means that you can be muvrar, you can figure out, now there's no physical way to do it, but you can halachically figure out that one person has one part and one person has another part. So if I'm a partner with someone in a well, it means that I own half the water molecules and he owns half the water molecules. And it just turns out to be that whatever I draw is from my half. Whatever he draws is from his half, right? The opposite of yesh brera, of ein brera, is that it's all mixed up. It's all random, right? And we basically have an agreement that I don't know which part is mine and which part is yours, but I'll use mine and you'll use yours and we'll basically share. But if you hold, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, yesh brera, it means that when I draw from the well, I'm using my well. And when my partner draws from the well, he's using his well. So when I say to him, you can go draw water from the well, I'm not relinquishing anything about my ownership, right? Because when he draws from his well, basically. And so saying to him, it's your turn, doesn't absolve me of any responsibility. The only thing that will absolve me of responsibility is if I say to him, okay, here's the cover, right? Make sure you cover it up when you're done. But just saying you use it does not give him basically rights on my thing because he's using his own part of the well, essentially. So let's read that inside. The my kamiflagi was it down here if you want. My kamiflagi, Yaakov Savar Yesh Breira, and therefore high midide kamimale, high midide kamimale. Each person is filling up his water from his own quote unquote portion of the well, and so just passing over ownership doesn't, or passing over rights to use it doesn't give over any ownership. And Rabbanan Sabri Ein Breira. And Amar Ravina says to Ravina, part of the reason we say that Azul Tamayo, because there's a Mishnah where each one says that opinion. It's none, because we have a Mishnah, a very important Mishnah, right, in Nidarim that says Hashutvim, Shenadru Hana'a Mizeh Mizeh. Right. Unfortunately, this is a very common occurrence, right? Two people, best of friends, go into a property together, and then after a while, they're no longer best of friends, right? And so they own something together. We all know this, unfortunately. And then they make a neder hana. And each one says to the other, I never want you can never use my field. You can never get hana from me. Problem is that they own the car together, right? So it's very hard to drive half a car, right? Or the cars, I guess, are a little complicated, but you own a field. So how can they both go into a field when it's owned jointly and each one cannot get benefit from the other? Says Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov, no problem. Each one has half the field, and that's the half that they own 100%. And so they're not benefiting from their friend because they're using their own thing. And the Rabbanan disagree. I skipped some words. Yeah. You can't walk into the field, into the yard, sorry. The Rebbe ben Yaakov says, no. The Micah Miflagi. Rebbe ben Yaakov Savar, Yesh Breira. Rebbe ben Yaakov, that when you have ownership, it doesn't mean that everyone is mixed up in the whole thing. It means that each one has their own individual rights. We can't designate necessarily one or the other, but whatever you end up using ends up being yours. Each one goes up into their own space. Rabbanan Savri Ein Breira, and therefore, if you walk into the field, you're walking partially on your friend's field. And since it's Asur Hana'a to you, you can't do that. So that is the unrelated but question of the pit. Amar Rebbe Lazar, now 4 lines from the bottom of Daf Nun Aleph Amud Hamocher bor lechavero. If a person sells a well to his friend, okay? So I have a well that I dug, it has water in it or whatever. I sell it to someone else. Kivan shemasar lo dalyo kana. When I give you this cover, right, this sort of over thing that protects the well, then that's a kinyan. That signals the deal. Just 1 second. When you sell a property to someone, the way you're kona property is through kinyan, through you can't lift it, right? You're kona through money. You could be kona through a star. You can be kona through chazakah maybe. But giving over a key is not a way to be kona, right? Hechidami, ibekaspa. If he paid you money for it, then you're likni bekaspa. You acquired it with the money. Ibechazakah, likni bechazakah. Chazakah means using it. Then you're kona bechazakah. Says no, olam, it's you were kona bechazakah. You didn't give money, because if you had given money, the money itself would have been the kinyan. But you acquired this well by just using it, right? But if I use your well, I don't acquire it, right? I'm stealing if I do that. So it has to be a case where I say to you, Lech chazeku kni. Okay, thanks for making the deal with me. Thanks for letting me, I don't know, borrow $10 million. You can now own my well, but I have to say to him, you have to go and acquire it. And you didn't say, if you didn't say that, but you gave over the keys or gave over the top, that's the equivalent to saying that. Kivan shemasar lo dalyo. If you give over the cover, then Kamma amrin le'lech chazeku knidami. It's like you said to him, go and take ownership of this well. And of course, the same thing is true about a house with keys. Amr B'Shua Malevi, the bottom line, hamocher bayit l'chavero. If you sell a house to your friend, kivan shamasa lo mafteach kana. Once you hand over the keys, you're koneh. Asking Mark, again, the same question. Keys are not a mechanism of kinyan. Hechidami. Ibekaspa, if I bought the house, then likni bekaspa. Then when I give you the money, I'm koneh. Ibechazaka, if I'm not necessarily giving you money or not buying you with money, but let's say I forgive a debt or whatever reason, we go into a marriage arrangement or whatever, and I say you can go move into the house, then moving in is what requires it. That's chazakah. Likni bechazakah. Says Olam, the same answer. It's saying chazakah. But the person has to say to the buyer, le chazeku kni. Go and live in it. And if I didn't say that for whatever reason, but I gave you the keys, giving you the keys signals, kivan shemasa lo mafteach, it's kimanda amarle le chazeku knidami. It's as if I said to him, go and acquire it by living in it. Amar, one last similar case while we're on the topic. We can't resist. Amar Reish Lakish Mishum Rabbi Yanai. You'll see there's a little Christmas reference coming up. Amar Reish Lakish, it's not true, but wait till you see it. It says Reish Lakish Mishum Rabbi Yanai, Hamocher Eder Lechavero, a person who sells a flock to their friend. Again, these are all issues of kinyan, right? So I sell you my 30 sheep. right? I'm making aliyah. So I sell, or my sheep might be in Israel. I'm making a ridah. So I sell my flock of sheep to somebody. How does he acquire that? He gives me $10,000 or whatever, right? How you kona it? So says the Rabbi Yanai, kivan shemasalo mashkukit kana. When you pass out the mashkukit, we're going to see in a second what the mashkukit is, but from the language you understand, mashich means something that draws the flock, right? Something that draws them along. We'll see what that is. Once you give the mashkukit, everyone's seen the little boy, right, with the staff and the bell.
Yeah.
So that's one interpretation of what mashkukit is. So once you give him the mashkukit, kana hechidami. Well, I'm getting it. How are you kona the flock? Iba mishicha. Remember, mishicha means you draw animals along. So that's one way to acquire an animal. You can't lift an animal usually, sometimes, but you can draw it along. So then liknim b'mishicha. Iba misira, if it's giving it over, liknim b'misira. Lolam b'mishicha. You're talking about where you draw them along. Just like with the chazakah, you have to direct and say, go and bring my animal, draw the animals along, and they're yours. And if you didn't say that, but you gave masar le mashkuchit, once you pass over the thing that draws the animals, then kimanda amar le mashkuchini tami. It's as if you sent them, go and take it and acquire it. Ask the Gemara now the question you've been wondering, my mashkuchit, what is this thing that draws animals along? So hacha here, which here usually means in Bavel, right? Tergamu, they explained it's a karkashta. It's a bell, right? A karkash is a bell. So they would have some kind of signal that the what do they call it? Sheep would be conditioned to responding to. And they, I guess from a young age, I don't know how you train sheep because I'm not in that business, but shepherds know how to do that. And they would draw along and they would respond to it. Rabbi Yaakov says, no. What it was is it was an Iza da Azla Beresh Adra. They used to have a goat that would be like the mother. I don't know exactly if this equivalent exists. I'm sure it does. But you'd have a goat that would be like we have dogs, I think, that they use for this now, right? That would keep the sheep in line. So I guess maybe they didn't have dogs, or maybe it was a different strategy, but they had an A's. An A's is a male, right, who is stronger and maybe leads them, but it didn't, obviously not by force, but they would all follow along afterwards. So you would train this A's and the sheep would all follow along wherever that A's went, wherever that leader of the flock took them. Now, Kididarish, Ahu Galila, this Gemara is super obscure, the next two lines, but that's the reference. There you go. As one Galilean used to say, and again, obviously it's not anything related to the other Galilean that we talk about. So, but it just happens to be the same context, right? Jesus was coming, right? So that's how the Gemara sometimes refers to him, right? Ahu Galila. So anyways, as that Galila, which refers just here to some Amora who's from the Galil, I'm not sure why he got a name that was so unique. Led Rav Chisda, he was the Amora for Rav Chisda. He would say, "Kadrugiz raya al anna," when a shepherd is angry with his flock, avid lenagda samuta. He'll take the nagda, the leader, and make it blind. So that when a shepherd, again, this the people use all kinds of references to Bnei Yisrael and Chas v'Shalom, that when Hashem is really angry, the punishment, which unfortunately might be true, is to give us bad leaders, right? So that's what a shepherd would say. If you're angry at your flock, you take it out on the one that's supposed to be guiding them, whatever that means. But anyways, that's a reference to our case here, where if you're selling a flock, you pass over the leader, and that's how you sell the flock. Back to bar from that topic. The Mishnah then again is talking about partners. Continues our Mishnah now on Daf Nun Bet Amud Aleph, quarter of the way down, third of the way down. Kiso Harishon. The first person, there's two owners here, let's say. The first one comes and covers the bar appropriately. Okay, puts the top on top of the bar. Uba Hasheni Umatzo Megula. The second one comes and finds it uncovered. Now, the Gemara is going to ask, of course, how did that happen? Right? The first one covered it. So how did it get uncovered? Did the cover walked away? So we're going to see. But the second one, lo kiso hasheni, but the second one did not cover it. So then chayav, the second one. The second one is chayav, not the first one. Okay? And the rishon is patur. And we'll see why. Kiso kira'oi. Now, obviously, let me take a step back. It's going to be obvious in a couple minutes that even though you cover a bar, it happens that the cover can fall off the bar, right? Now, how can the cover fall off the bar? So there could be a wind that can make it fall off the bar. But a much more common thing is that animals walk on top of the bar. And what happens when animals walk on top of the bar is they weaken the cover of the bar. So maybe, and then we're going to talk about this in a second, like how often do you have to inspect your bar? once a month, once a year. Obviously with normal usage, the cover is going to decay. The other problem is that sometimes internally the cover of the bar rots, right? Because everything rots, right? Especially back then. It was not made out of metal, right? So if it's made out of wood, the wood will start decaying or being eaten up by termites or moldy or something, or rotting. So let's say kusal karawa, you cover it properly, whatever properly means. The nafala tocho shar chamar. And still a shar chamar falls into it. The Gemara's going to ask, of course, what does that mean? If you covered it, how did the animal fall into it? So we'll see. Umnate, and the animal dies. You're patur because you did the right thing. You covered it properly for this population. Some we'll see why. Some freak accident happened. It got uncovered. You're patur for that. But if lo kisal karaoi, you don't cover it properly, then navala tochoshar chamar meter chayav. Like Mark's gonna say, that's super obvious, right? That's what a bar is. You didn't cover it, animal fell into it. So obviously, we're going to learn something from that extra statement. Nafal lifanav mikol hakriya. Now let's say the animal falls into the bar. So you have a bar, and someone is digging inside the bar. They're doing construction to widen your bar. The animal hears that, and the animal gets confused. They hear the sound, and they basically follow the sound. So if they fall lifanav, they fall into it, mikol kriya, from the sound of digging. Chayav, you are chayav if they fall face forward. And the reason is head forward, because we assume that then the hevel of the bar damaged their breathing, right? This is the concept we talked about yesterday and the day before of the fumes, the toxic fumes, because it's head first. But if they fall lachurav, if the animal backs into your bar and falls down, so its head is sort of either sticking out of the bar or in the top part of the bar, then mikol kriya, then you're patur. The Gemara is going to discuss what the heck that's talking about too. Nafala tocho shar v'kelav. Now we had this case earlier a couple of times. If an animal falls into the bar, and it's wearing all its, a shar usually goes around with a bit and a saddle and a carry and like all kinds of material on top of it. Then nishtabru, and they break, so the kelim break. Or a chamar goes in. The chamar usually has a lot of sacks on top of it, so it's got kelav and it's karu, and they get torn. Chayav ala behima upatur al hakelim, as we learned before. We say shar velo ish and chamar velo kelav, right? I think that was the drasha. It was either the opposite, maybe. But we excluded from shar and chamar velo ish velo kelav. That you're not chayav for people, and you're not chayav for objects that get damaged in a bar. Now, finally, the last halakha in our Mishnah is nafal tocho shar. This is great. We talked about this last week, but right, you get into a shar that is either a deaf shar or a mad cow, right? Or a very, very immature cow. So it doesn't know to avoid a bar. Then you're chayav. But if it's ben obat, a shar, right? That's ben obat, right? Sorry, take it back. This is a human. Take it back. A human who's a benobat. Oh, eved va'amat patur. And we'll see in the Gemara these cases. But basically, the limit of the Mishnah is that you're chayav for a bar if an animal is not reasonably able to avoid it. We're going to see later that if you have an intelligent animal walking down the road, it's not normal for an animal to step into a pit, right? Animals that's why they live. They're smart enough not to walk into a fire, let's say. So therefore, an animal that does something that's silly for the animal, you might not be chayav for, but these are animals that can't protect themselves, okay? And we'll see later, it includes animals at night and things like that. It says the Gemara now, the case was in the Mishnah that the first one covered it, right? And then it got somehow uncovered, and the second one came and found it uncovered. So says the Gemara, Rishon ad emat miftar. For how long after the second one found out about it, right, and said, oh, it's uncovered, and he called the first guy, how long is it the second guy's responsibility, not the first guy's? Because if you get a phone call saying, oh, by the way, your water main broke and your water's leaking down the road and causing problems, you have a certain amount of time to go and fix that, right? If it's an onus that it broke, you're not chayav for the initial responsibility. Once you know about it, you got to do something about it. So how long after he knows about it is he still patur? Amarav bichdei sheyada, as long as it takes to inform him. Once he knows, he's got to go and be responsible. Shmuel says, no. Just knowing, bichdei sheyodiu, as long as it takes for them to go and inform him about it, which is a little bit longer, meaning he has to be told about it. Rabbi Yochanan says, No, it's a little bit longer because just finding out that your bar is broken doesn't mean you can fix it, right? It's bichdei sheyodiu v'yiskor po'alim v'yichrot arazim v'yichasenu. You got to go to the street, you got to go to the store, you got to hire people. They got to go to the forest, cut down a tree, make a wooden cover, and cover your bar. It could take days or could take weeks nowadays, right? So you don't have responsibility until you have the time to actually fix it. Now, the machloket, of course, has to do with whether you have to stand there and announce to people, like be a human protection. So anyways, that is how much time you have to cover your bar. Continues the Gemara. Let's say the next case was kiso karoi. A person covered his bar properly to protect against animals falling in. But still, nafal tocho shor chamaru mate, still an animal fell in and died, you're patur. Says Gemara once, the case doesn't make any sense. Kiven de kaso karoi hechinafa. If you covered your bar, how did the animal fall into it and die? Amar Yitzchak bar Chana, unusual, right? Call after Chana, shitli amitocho. You're talking about a case where the cover of the bar was rotted from inside. You couldn't see it. There was no visible. So you went and you did your visual checks. The bar looked okay. The cover looked okay. But it turned out that actually it was rotting. An animal stepped on it and cracked right through it, fell into the bar. Ibayla. Ask the Gemara the following question. This is going to consume us till the end of today's daf. Let's say you have a bar that's in a area which high traffic of cows, but not high traffic of elephants. Where it doesn't use elephants, they use camels, okay, which are bigger than cows. In case anyone here has never seen a camel. So you covered your bar, but you can't afford to pay for wood that would hold up. That's very expensive. You cover your bar with wood that holds up a cow, and you maybe put up a sign. This, of course, is a big question. If you put up a sign that says danger, low, right? They have on the bridge, right? Can't carry a weight above 20,000 tons or something, right? So how much does that protect you? So Gemara does not address that today, whether signs would help you out in the situation. But you covered the bar with a cover that is good for animals, for cows, but not good for camels. Let's read the Gemara. And then a camel came and walked over it. And of course, because the camel walked over it, it cracked it. And it got weaker. And it didn't fall through though, right? Rashi understands if the camel fell through, you'd for sure be chayav. Because your bar was not fit to protect against camels, right? But the camel didn't fall through. But then the next day, the cow came. And then the cow came and fell through it. So you had built a cover to protect against cows, but it got weaker because of your negligence, so to speak, of allowing it to be abused by camels. So what's the halacha? Amri said the Gemara, well, it depends. How likely is it that a camel would come? If it's a road that's used by camels frequently, then poshehu. Then you didn't build a proper cover for your bar because you knew there was going to be heavy trucks coming and you didn't protect it. If there's no camels and all of a sudden, some rare camel came through town, anusu, that's unexplainable, that's unpredictable, and you're not responsible. It must be the case where they come occasionally. Dati the prakim, right? They come once in a while. It's not the craziest thing. It's not a common thing. And do you say, the prakim poshehu? Do you say, since everyone should know that there's some camels, you're a posheya, you should have planned accordingly. Since now we don't expect them, anusu, it's considered to be anus, and therefore you are patur. Tashma. Let's try to prove this from the Mishnah. Kiso karaoi. Our Mishnah said, this is a quote from our Mishnah, you covered your bar properly, and then an animal fell into it, v'mate, you're patur. Now, what does that mean you covered it properly? Let's say you had the best cover. It protects against cows and even protects against heavier animals like gemalim, right? So then, how did the shard fall into the bar? Clearly, it doesn't make any sense. If you have a great cover, nothing can fall through. Elalav, it means if you covered it, it must be where you covered your bar in a way that would protect against cows, right? Below gemalim, but you didn't cover it in a way that would protect against gemalim, turn the page, and then Rashi understands, and then a camel came and stood on it and weakened it, and then a shark came and fell through it, right? And the Mishnah says you're patur. Now, again, how common are camels? If camels come all the time, am I patur? Posheo. Why would you say you're patur? You did it negligent covering. If there's no camels usually, and it's a rare occasion, and an elephant came through town, you don't have to expect that's going to happen, and so you'd be considered an honest. Elav, must be our Mishnah is talking about a case. Datyan prakim, they come rarely. Again, it's very hard to know what prakim means, right? Occasionally. The atu gimalim, and then you covered your bar with a cover that works for cows, not for camels, because camels don't come very often, but they came. Atu gimalim ve'erua, and they made it weaker. Vatu shvarim enough lube, and then a shark came and fell through it. Viktani patur, you're patur. Amma, what you see is kivan dahashta leka. Since now there's no expectation that a camel is coming anytime soon. Again, it's also hard to know what does that mean. Hashta, what does now mean? Right, for the next week, next month, it's not clearly defined. But since given the hashta leka, since there's none right now, unassum, it's considered to be again unavoidable against your, you couldn't have prevented it. So that seems to prove one way. Amri, we said no. L'olam, in fact, what happened is the Mishnah saying you're patur because you covered your bar with the maximum cover. This is enough to protect against falling cows or falling camels. Asking if that's the case, then how did the bar fall apart? Can't say because a camel came and weakened it. It's camel grade, right? So hechi dami. So the kakashale hechi nafal, how did it fall through? That's what you're gonna have to say. What we said before, it wasn't an external thing; it was an internal thing. Amar Yitzchak bar Chana shetzliya mituchal. It's where it rotted from the inside. Now, again, the question that you're going to ask is, well, don't you have to know that sometimes your bar will rot from the inside, right? So how could you be patur? And we're not going to clarify exactly. We'll see in a second that there are times where you actually have to check in order to see whether your bar is weakening from the inside. But here, from all external appearances, everything was good, and therefore you are patur because you did everything you could have done. Tashma, let's try to prove it from the next words of the Mishnah, which we thought were pretty extra, right? It said the next words in the Mishnah, Lo kiso kiraoi, you don't cover your bar properly, then nafal tochoshar v'chamar, and an animal falls into it v'mate and dies, chayev. You're chayev to pay. So we said, hey chidami, it says, what's the case? If you didn't put on any cover, meaning you put a piece of plywood, but it won't even be something that protects against cows or camels, then pshita, of course you're chayiv. Everyone knows that that's a bar. You didn't put a proper cover, animal fell into it and died, you're chayiv. Ella lav shvarim. It must be that when we say you didn't cover it, it means you covered it for cows, but you didn't cover it ligamalim. So now that's the opposite. Then we're saying you're chayiv. So chidami. If gemalim come every day, then posheyahu. Then the fact that you didn't put a proper cover for camels means that you didn't properly cover your bar. If camels don't come, then anusu. Then why are you chayiv? It's a anus. It's accident. Ella lav da'atin liprakim. It must be a case, like we said before, that camels come rarely or occasionally. Vatu gemalim vir'uhu, and you put your bar down enough to cover for cows, but not enough to cover for camels. And a camel came and it weakened the cover. Vatu shvarim v'naflu, and then a shark came and fell through. Right? And here we say you're chayiv. Now that's a direct contradiction to what we just said in the previous case, right? Alma, you see, even the atyan prakim posheyahu. It must be a case which is posheya, right? I'm sorry, that's considered to be posheya because you got to pay attention. Now the Bach takes out the next line, and I'm going to do it too, even though there's ways to read it. So skip one line down to the word ID. The answer is that, you know what? The second part of the Mishnah tells you nothing. But ID, the Nasiv Reisha Kisal Karoi, but since the first part of the Mishnah said you covered it properly, Nasiv Seifa Nami Lo Kisal Karoi. So therefore the Seifa says the same language, but in fact it's not coming to tell you a point. It's not coming to tell you specifically that if you cover it enough to control cows, but not control camels, and a camel comes and weakens it, that you'd be chayav. It's not the case. We don't know yet what the answer is, but it's very possible now that you'd be putter in that case. You might also be chayav. We still have not resolved. The first part of the Mishnah is referring to where it becomes internally rotted, so you're putter. The second part is a case where it is not internally rotted and therefore you're chayiv. Now, ikad some say, hanami vadi lo iboin. In fact, this is not a question that we would have had if you cover your bar with a cover that's good for cows, but not good for camels. In a locale where camels come occasionally, that's considered to be negligent. You've got to be prepared. It's not a 70-year storm, right? It's a camel that comes, every month. You should build your bar to protect against that. So kivan da'ati on the prakim posheo. Right? You should have paid attention and known what traffic is coming down the road and built your protection accordingly. When did we have a question about responsibility? This is the case that we had a question about. Let's say, and this is the next case, you build it in a way that can protect against cows. It can't protect against camels, and you're in a place where camels come all the time, so that's a bad bar cover, okay? But it turns out that for 10 days, no camels came. So no camel came. You got lucky. It was camel holiday, right? But hitzliya mitocho. But your bar got rotted internally, your bar cover, in those 10 days. And then a cow walks along and falls through it. So this is very similar, and Tosfos takes great pains to say it's not the same, but it's very similar to a concept we call tchilato b'pshia v'sofo ba'ones. You started off by doing something that you was not good. You didn't protect your bar properly because you put down a cover that would not protect against camels, and camels frequently come. But it turns out that that's not what happened. The camels didn't come. It rotted from the inside, which we consider to be an ones. It's uncommon, right? There were termites. You could have never predicted that. So it turned out that you didn't do a good job to begin with, but the reason the cow died was because of something totally unavoidable on your part. So how much responsibility do you have before? The reason Tosfos goes to great pains to say this is different is that that's a machlokah we've had many times before. Tchilato b'pshia and sofo ba'ones, and Argamar does not even bring those sort of same arguments in those cases. So he differentiates here between, tchilato b'pshia and sofo ba'ones. The case, remember the famous case we had before, was you brought your cow up to the roof, which is a silly thing because cows should not be on roofs, right? But then your cow fell off the roof in a way that was an ones, right? So it wasn't your fault, right? There was a huge wind, let's say. So there we said, well, the cow shouldn't have been there, but the way it fell off was an onus. There, Tosfos says it's talking about the same cow essentially. But here it's a little bit different because here your pshia was for camels, but the onus that happened was for worms, right? So therefore it's slightly different. Anyways, you can see there's a big Tosfos that goes through this in great detail. But this is the question. So you did not protect your bar properly, but what ended up causing the shard to fall through was not related to your negligence. It was related to an onus. So what's the halacha there? We read that all inside. Mi amrina, do you say, Migo, we love our favorite word, right? Migo dahavi poshe etzel gemalim. Since you did something negligent because you didn't protect it against camels, havi poshe namilin hatla'a, we give you responsibility for any accident, including worm eating. Or you don't say that. So Tashma, let's try to prove it from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, you ready? Kisao kara'oi, you covered your bar properly. Excuse me. Animal fell into it and died, patur. Now, it's marala. We said about that. Amar Yitzchak bar Chana, shetliya mitocho. It's talking about a case where the bar rotted from the inside. Now, okay, that's the answer to why the cow fell through the bar. But hey chidami, what was the case of what kind of cover you put? If you put a great cover, $1 million cover for cows and for camels, and it rotted from the inside, pshita that you're putter. Because my havile lemeva, you can't, it's unavoidable, right? Bugs come, you can't avoid them, it happens. It must be that you put on a cover that was good enough for cows, but not good enough for gemalim. And that's a bad cover, because gemalim come all the time. But what ended up happening was the internal rotting. The katani patur, and you see your patur. You see from here that since what ended up causing the animal to die was not your fault, even though you did a bad job to begin with, you're not chayiv. So Marlo doesn't prove that because it could be the case in the Mishnah was the olam, you actually covered it with a excellent cover. And in fact, what happened had nothing to do with your cover and the weight that it could hold. It was hitzliya mitocho. It was rotted from termites internally. And your question then is, so why in the world would you say you're putter? And why would you have to tell me you're putter? It's pshita, right? Obviously you're putter. What could you have done? What could the person have done? I would have thought you have to go and bang on your cover. Right? Listen for sounds of rotted wood, or I guess you can't even look inside and see because they're internal, but there's ways you can hear if it's hollow on the inside, right? Because bugs are eating through it, because termites are doing it. So maybe you have to do more extensive evaluation, right? And this, of course, practically speaking, in the ways that this halacha becomes practical, has a lot to do with how often you got to inspect things, right? How frequently. If you have a cover, you have to look at it every year, every 10 years, every whatever it is. Kamash Malam, but the chiddush here is that you don't have to do that level of checking in regards to termites. Again, where that leaves us in terms of our barot is unclear. Okay, take a breath. Tashma, let's try to prove it from the second case in the Mishnah. I'm not really sure how to say where we are, but it's around 12 lines from the bottom. Fourth one on the line. Tashma, and this is the next words in the Mishnah. Lo kiso kara, or you didn't cover your well properly. Then afala tochoshar chamor, and an animal falls into it, umeit chayav. Now again, echidami. What does that mean? You didn't cover it properly. You didn't cover it for any animals, not for small or big ones. It's funny we call shar a small animal. I'd say medium and large, right? Then you got to tell me that you're chayav. Of course you're chayav. Ella, you covered it, lav kara oilish shvarim. You covered it enough to protect against the common cows, but it wasn't enough to cover against camels. And now what's the question? If your camel comes all the time, then that's a bad cover. If they don't come ever or frequently or rarely, anusu, then it's an accident. It must be the case. Remember, we said earlier in this interpretation, there's no such thing as every once in a while, right? If a camel comes once in a while, that's considered to be shchiyah. We don't have that answer anymore. So now we said it must be that they do come. Lav d'shchichin gemalim. And therefore your well cover was inadequate because it only protected cows, not camels. But that's not why the cow fell through. It fell through hitliya mitucha because it got rotten from the inside. It got eaten up. Vikatani chayav. So there you see that you are chayav. Amar minan migo davi poshelin gemalim havi poshelin hatla. You see that it's a migo that since you are chayav for the camels because you didn't cover it properly, you'd be chayav for worms or for termites that eat it away. Amri, the answer low, that's not necessarily a proof. The Bach plays around with the Gersa here too, but I'm just going to read what we have. The Olam, you covered it, right? You covered it appropriately for camels and not for cows, but not for camels. Ushchichli gemalim, and gemalim come there frequently. Va'atu gemalim ve'ru, and the gemalim came and they weakened it. And so therefore it became a weaker cover. And then the cow, but they didn't fall through. And then the cow came and fell through. Va'atu shvarim v'naflu pshita, right? Posheahu. You might say, okay, that seems to be obvious. You didn't cover it properly. You only gave it a cover that would protect against cows, not against camels, and camels come. The same answer we gave earlier. You're right, it is pshita. And the only reason the Mishnah said it is because we want to keep the symmetry in the way we talk in the Mishnah. I need to nasiv reisha kisal karaoi, nasiv nami seifa, nasiv seifa nami lo kisal karaoi. So therefore, it's true. It is pasha. It's not an added chiddush. It's just that we don't need to add something because we're actually including it just for the beauty and the symmetry of the language so you can remember the Mishnah a little bit better. So Tashma, you know what? Let's bring a proof from the following Braita, which we're going to have in a couple days, 2 days. It says the Braita, we're 4 lines from the bottom, Tashma, Nafal tocho shar cheresh shutav v'katan. Right, that was our Mishnah. An animal that is not able to distinguish, it's a small animal, so it doesn't have the knowledge yet, or it's a deaf animal. I'm not sure what that's with the hole in the ground, but it's not able to get its bearings very well. So we always talk about cheresh, or it's a shoteh, it's a cow that had a lot to drink or something, and therefore is not able to protect itself, so to speak, and therefore you're chayav. Continues the Braita, though, adds a couple cases. What about if it's a suma, a blind cow, or mahalich balayla, or it's walking at night? In all those cases, you'd be chayav, right? Because you left an open hole in the ground and the cow fell through it. But if it's a pikeach, if it's a very smart cow, right? Which doesn't necessarily mean a very smart cow, but a regular intelligent cow, and it's mahalech b'yom, sorry, not or, and it's going during the day, and it walks straight into your hole in the ground, you're patur, because why in the world did the cow go into the hole in the ground, right? So you're patur. Says the Gemara, this seems to be exactly the case, because you left the hole open with nothing to protect it from unintelligent cows or cows at night. It turned out that what happened was a cow that should have been protected, but you're patur, right? So that's the equivalent to you made a bar that wouldn't protect against camels, So you were Poshea, but then it got rotted away from termites and things fell through. So your Pashia was in one thing, the damage was in another thing, and this Braita clearly says you're Potter, right? Amai says, why is that the case? Nema Nidahavi Poshea Le'in Cheresh. You left open a well that's Pshia because deaf cows are going to walk into it. So Havinami Poshea Le'in Pikeach. Why don't you say that even though what ended up happening was not your Pshia, you're still Chayav? Elalav Shmamina, you conclusively see from here that Lo Aminan, Migo, you don't say this Migo specifically, that since you made a bad watching for camels or for deaf cows, it's also Chayav for cows, regular cows, or smart cows. Shmamina, you can prove it conclusively from there. We will stop there at the last line. And it's said in the bulletin that Daf Yomi tomorrow will be at 7:45 a.m. So I'm not sure yet if it's me or Dove, but someone will be teaching, God willing, tomorrow morning. I hope. I'll put it, I asked Dove, and I don't think he responds to me. So if he can't, I can do it. But let me see what he says.
Yeah, I understand the non-Jews have some kind of holiday.
Miriam's in Israel, so the same thing.
Same thing. You worry about it.
Okay, thanks everyone for joining. Have a great week.
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.